Welcome back to Mr. Sturgeon's classroom. Today for Government and Politics, we are going to be studying a few of our founding fathers for lesson 1.3. Now again, I'm not going to cover all of them, but I do want to cover the ones that especially for the AP Government and Politics exam will show up. Before we begin, I did promise we would cover one more Enlightenment thinker before we move on, and it was Thomas Hobbes. Now, I think the video, if you go onto the slides, it does a very good job at explaining Thomas Hobbes' thinking. But Thomas Hobbes was, again, one of those Enlightenment thinkers that our founding fathers were very much influenced by. And the reason they were influenced by him was he had this argument that he believed a government with laws and somebody to rule is absolutely necessary, that we cannot have anarchy. Because if we have anarchy, people are going to be taken advantage of. People are going to be, it's like survival of the fittest. It's the purge. It's going to be only the strong will survive. Now, some people in theory think that's the way to go, but for Thomas Hobbes and our founding fathers, they did not agree. They thought that we needed some sort of government in place with laws to protect everyone. Otherwise, there would be chaos. And he is right that if there was anarchy, there could be chaos. Now, naturally, maybe some laws would be created, but Thomas Hobbes would be one of those Enlightenment thinkers that our founding fathers looked for a government. Now, the issue is how much power, how much freedom should be given up for a government? How strong should a government be? And that is the core argument with our founding fathers and our new government. And so here is the background. You would have two groups who really, at the beginning of our country, were the two main groups who would fight one another. Not physically, well, maybe in some cases, yeah, physically, but for the most part, they were the ones who were arguing either for a strong national government or for a strong state or individual rights. Now, you would have Federalists, and Federalists were people who believed in a strong federal or national government. They were sometimes seen as the more privileged, the more aristocracy, the more elite, but they were the people who thought we needed a strong government and that a new strong government would protect the people and especially at the time, our property. Because a lot of times what these Federalists were worried about was that the Great Britain or somebody would come along and take their power or their things away from them. So they believed in a strong national government. That's why they're known as the Federalists. And they believed in a new constitution. They would be opposed by the Anti-Federalists. Now, Anti-Federalists weren't necessarily like the farmers, but they were kind of the more commoner. And Anti-Federalists, they wanted a strong state government or strong state powers because they think that the individual deserves the right to really control most of the governmental power when it came to a new country. They believed the Constitution drained a lot of the power from the states. And we're going to be talking about the Constitution in later units. But they also believed that once a government was given power, that they would never give it back. And that is a real strong fear still from a lot of people that once you give power to the federal government, that they have no reason to ever give it back to you. And we're going to cover things like the Articles of Confederation and the Federalist Papers and Brutus I. But you would have these two groups who would compete to see what type of government was formed for this new country. And so, like I said before, you would have Federalists, Anti-Federalists, some of the famous Federalists, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, they wrote something called the Federalist Papers, and these papers, again, were supporting our new Constitution, were supporting a strong national government, and again, they believed that it needed protection from the people or factions or even persuasion, and so they believed a strong national government was the best way to do this. The Anti-Federalists, the famous one, Thomas Jefferson, he again believed that too much power given to the government would be taken advantage of, and that individual rights would then be abused, and that the government would control the people too much, kind of like a king. And so when you listen to Hamilton, if you ever do, you're going to see Jefferson and Hamilton are usually at odds with one another because they have these two very much differing views on how a government should be run. So you should really listen to the album Hamilton, because you're going to see this fight between them happen in multiple scenes. Now, covering some of the major players in our new government, you would have James Madison. Now, James Madison, he was really the architect of the Constitution. He was the one who believed that we needed a strong national government, but more than that, we needed a way to protect people by not giving them too much power. He believed that uneducated people could be persuaded too easily. He believed that too much power given to the people could be abused. And he also had this very radical idea that there should be a separation between the church, whatever church it is, and the state. And what he meant by the state was the government. Because up until this point, just like Great Britain, the government was very much controlled or influenced by the church. And so he had a clause written in the Constitution. It was called the Establishment Clause. And it basically said that the church, whichever church it is, will not have any sort of influence on the decisions of our government. Very radical for the time, but again, it was one of those ways that he didn't want people to be influenced by, popular decisions or the church. And so he had the Establishment Clause written into our Constitution. And that's where we get this kind of phrase of the separation of church and state. So that's James Madison. Then you're going to have, as of right now, probably the most famous one, Alexander Hamilton. He is, again, a Federalist. He supported this new Constitution. He believed in a strong central government. He was one of the lead authors with the Federalist Papers, and he even was our first Secretary of the Treasury. He's on the $10 bill, if you didn't know. He created the National Bank, and he basically made sure that we had money after the war was over to actually run a country. Because that's really the fuel that runs a country and a government is money. And because of him, we were able to at least have the foundation to build this new government. So Alexander Hamilton, Federalist, supports the strong central government and was our first Secretary of the Treasury. Now, his big opposition, the guy he would always butt heads with, that's going to be Thomas Jefferson. Now, Thomas Jefferson, he was an anti-federalist. He was more of a, even though he was very much a elite, he did like kind of individual rights. He believed in the common man. He believed in, working the fields, working the nature to kind of start yourself. He didn't think the government needed to intervene that much. So he was an anti-federalist that very much supported state governments and individual rights. He was one of our lead authors in the Declaration of Independence. And the reason for that is during the time of the Declaration of Independence and during the early stages of our country, he was in France. So he was listening to a lot of these Enlightenment thinkers. Him and Benjamin Franklin, they were in France a lot. They listened to a lot of Enlightenment thinkers. And so when they came back, they were the ones who were really the architects of the Declaration of Independence and kind of said, hey, listen, this is what we learned over there, and this is what King George is not doing for us. He was our first Secretary of State, which basically meant he worked with other nations, other countries when it came to politics and foreign policy. He was very much anti-Alexander Hamilton. Like I said, they butted heads all the time, but he was an anti-federalist, author of the Declaration of Independence, and again, First Secretary of the State. So those were just a few of the founding fathers. Obviously, there are a lot more, but what you need to understand going into these next units is that there is going to be a strong struggle between Federalists and Anti-Federalists. That is what you really need to take from this lesson, that you are going to see a big push from Federalists for a strong national government and Anti-Federalists for a strong state or individual rights type of government. So that is really the conflict we're going to be seeing with this new country. So next lesson, it's going to be 1.4, Articles of Confederation. And this is where you're going to start to see that conflict between Federalists and Anti-Federalists emerge. So enjoy.